Hey guys, this is Joel from the Castle Pokemon Gym. I've already looked at decks over the past couple weeks featuring my two favorite ancients, Walking Wake and Gouging Fire. I don't really see a way to do Raging Bolt EX that isn't just a regurgitation of other format lists, and I'm not here to talk about decks to get beat to death by other content creators. So I thought I would look at the future guys, which does give me an opportunity to stay focused on my favorite Pokemon. Kind of. My all-time favorites are Golem, the Brostash Landorus, and Terrakion. Still working on a functional 151 Golem EX deck, and I may do a video on that soon. But the new Iron Boulder EX is close enough to Terrakion for him to count in my book. As far as the video game goes, I own Scarlet, so my DLC did not have access to Iron Boulder, but I have seen him, and he's okay. I may be a bit of a Terrakion purist, but I'll take what I can get as far as my fandom goes. Let's look at the card itself, and we're going to look at the regular version here because the art version looks like he's standing on Mickey Mouse, and I'm not a Disney guy. Iron Boulder EX has 2 attacks. His first attack is Repulsive Axe, which sounds awesome. I might actually name my next dog that, maybe Repulsor. But anyway, Repulsive Axe does 60 damage and then sets up an 8 damage Rocky Helmet for Iron Boulder on the next turn, meaning that if he is damaged, you put 8 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. It's interesting that it says attacking and not defending, which I think means that even if something like Alakazam EX attacks you from the bench, that applies to him, but not 100% certain on that. However, the 8 damage counters is an effect of the attack, so anything that does cancel the effects of an attack, like the new Mist Energy, does negate that 8 damage counters, but not too many things are playing that, I think, outside of Arceus and Lugia. Iron Boulder's second attack is called Power Stomp. It does 200 damage and you discard 2 energy from him, which is kind of meh, but remember he is a future Pokemon, so all of the tools that are part of that engine do come into play. The booster capsule adds 20 damage. Each Iron Crown EX in play adds another 20 damage. Grant, because he's a fighting Pokemon, can add another 30 damage. A maxed out Power Stomp can reach 310. You're probably not going to hit that scenario very often, definitely not every time, but he should consistently hit 260 damage, which is still very solid. And there are multiple ways to clean up the near misses. I'll get to that more when we get to the list. This most recent iteration of Pokemon with ancient and future characters and cards is a popular well that Pokemon goes back to from time to time. Theme sets like Paradox Rift, Temporal Forces, and even a few cards in Twilight Masquerade are a return to the likes of the Team Plasma days of the Black and White era, or the SP days of Diamond and Pearl, where there is a mini, what I like to call an engine of Pokemon trainer cards and energy cards that all go together, which just shows that not only does history repeat itself, it also rhymes. And I think you'll see that as you look at this list, that the Pokemon are pretty interchangeable once you have a working deck structure. If any of you were around and playing at the time, any future deck will surely remind you of the Plasma decks, mainly TDK or Thundurus, Deoxys Kyurem. Whether you play this version, an Iron Hands version, or an Iron Leaves version, you'll see how much this functions like that TDK deck did. The Thundurus in this deck is Miraidon. Miraidon hits for 40 damage and then attaches 2 energies from the deck, which is nice, that you don't have to dig it out and you don't have to get it in your hand or even further try to discard it, which is a major space saver in the deck overall. Like everything else in this deck, that 40 damage gets boosted to 60 with a capsule and then 20 more for each Iron Crown, which is the Deoxys EX from the TDK deck, but a better version of him. So with a typical start, you hit for 100 damage and charge your Iron Boulder. I've already covered what Iron Boulder does, so I won't get back into that again. But everything else here is basically support, except for Hydreigon. Hydreigon has 2 attacks. The first one is Homing Headbutt, which does 50 damage to anyone with damage counters on them, and he can hit up to 3 targets at a time if you have that much damage spread around. His second attack, Baryon Beam, does 150 for 5 energy, which seems ridiculous, but it's only 3 if he has a capsule attached, which in doing so automatically raises the damage to 170. Again, if it's boosted by Iron Crown, he can max out his attack at 230 in this deck. Hydreigon is probably worth a video of his own, but in this deck he serves 2 purposes. His main function is to hit and snipe anything that you've almost knocked out but missed, especially if somebody retreated something. Secondarily, you can turn to him as an attacker against single prize decks or even the lower HP EX decks. Like I said, he can hit up to 230, and that takes out most of these lower HP guys. So in this deck, you could up the count of him, or you could drop him completely. And that's up to you and your local meta, and that's the beauty of lists like this, which is the interchangeability of the parts. It seems like the main choices for draw support right now are either to use B-Barrel or play a combination of Mew EX and Radiant Greninja. Obviously, B-Barrel is more consistent in what he allows you to draw and how many times you can actually draw with him in a game, but I don't find an overwhelming need to draw a lot, especially once this deck is set up. Using Radiant Greninja doesn't benefit you a lot because you're not looking for a lot of energy in the discard pile. You get that pretty quickly with Iron Boulder EX and his second attack. I find myself turning to Mew EX more often because he gives you another free retreater, if nothing else. In an ideal game, you would not have either of those guys down at all. You'd like to have 3 Iron Crown, 2 Iron Boulder, and a Miraidon. But Greninja and Mew are good outs for bad situations, so it's nice to have them in there as backups. Going down the rest of the list, the items are pretty self-explanatory. I don't regularly hit fighting energy too often with the Gutsy Pickaxe, but it does provide a little bit of extra draw. Grant, who seems like nobody ever even looks at, goes in every fighting deck I build because it's just one card. I know I've said this before with him, but with him in the discard pile, you always know where he is. You can get him whenever you need him. You can use him to thin your hand to just get rid of extra cards that you don't need anymore, and the extra 30 damage that he provides is never a bad thing. Really, the last thing to look at is the A-Spec. I went with the Reboot Pod because it can be helpful, though I've played many games where I have never needed to use it. The oddest part of Reboot Pod is that you have to attach to each future Pokemon that you have in play, meaning that if you have 4 or 5 energy in the discard pile, you're going to have to at least attach to 1 Iron Crown, sometimes to 2 of them. And it's not a choice, you have to do it. So maybe another A-Spec is better. I feel like this one needs some time just to see if it's worth it and how important it might be in more late game situations in this deck. Reboot Pod is definitely better in a box feature deck instead of just a single type one like this one, because in those decks you have different types of energy, so it's obviously more beneficial to you. It's kind of awkward in this deck. The last thing that needs mentioning is Jirachi. Jirachi is not on this list because as I prepared this feature, Dragapult EX wasn't a thing. That's just in the last week that people are starting to actually get the cards to play with that online. The problem is it is a thing now. I'd say this week, 4 out of 5 games that I've played have been against Dragapult, and the damage counter effect from Dragapult is devastating. So moving forward, I'd say definitely drop a card from this list. You can kind of pick whichever one you want to for a Jirachi, and honestly I would say maybe 2 for 2 Jirachi, because I think he's going to be that important going forward once Dragapult EX is officially in the format. And also, buy a couple copies of Jirachi if you need them. Go ahead and do that now before it becomes painfully obvious that everybody needs a couple copies of it, because that might make the price of it kind of go stupid. But that's the deck. Let's look at some games. This first game was against Arceus Giratina. They went first. I hit everything on my turn but energy, so on their turn they got Arceus V-Star, Maximum Belt. They caught my Iron Boulder, hitting it for 230. And I think with hindsight they might have won this game if they'd chose an Iron Crown and took the prizes instead, but they narrowly missed the Boulder. I played a Research, I get a second Boulder down, and I put a Capsule on it. Then I used Radiant Greninja, and I draw Pickaxe and Boss. Since I have 2 Boulder in play now, I want to try the Pickaxe before attaching anywhere, because it would allow me to fully charge the benched one. I actually get 2 tries at it, and they both miss, so I attach to the benched one, then I use the Pod, which is not the best use for it, but I'm definitely not as set up as they are, so I want to put some pressure on them. If I had a 3rd Crown down, this Repulsive Axe would actually be a knockout, but I hit for 240 and set up the 8 damage counter effect. On their turn, they evolve to Giratina V-Star, and they retreat the Arceus. And then they're going to one-shot my Boulder, and they burn the energy off the Arceus V-Star, which is smart, because my plan is to target it with Miraidon on my turn anyway, since I'm holding Boss. After the attack, Giratina takes 80 damage from Repulsive Axe, which puts him in easier range to hit. Attached to Miraidon, I play Pokegear and hit a Research. Then I'm going to use Concealed Cards from Greninja. Get a Ultra Ball off of that, which is good enough. I don't want to toss any supporters, so I'm going to use Town Store just to get a TM that I can use to discard with Ultra Ball. I'm going to do that, play the Ultra Ball, and get another Iron Boulder. I'll play him down, and I'm going to boss up the Arceus. And I'm going to take that knockout on the Arceus and use Miraidon to charge my Iron Boulder. Get 2 on him. And then for my prizes here, I get 2 more energy, which are definitely valuable commodities in this deck. On their turn, they bench another Arceus. Then an Iron Leaves, which does hit my Iron Boulder for weakness. They use its ability to switch it to the active spot, and then they attach to it for their energy for the turn. I trim their rather long efforts to hit a boss, which they miss, so they just knock out the Miraidon. I attach to the boulder on my bench, and then I use Radiant Greninja and draw an Arven. I use Arven to grab a Super Rod, because I have 4 energy in the discard pile now, which is why I haven't cut the pod yet. I just need to learn to use it better, because it would be very nice in this situation. I'm going to bench a Miraidon, and then I'm going to retreat for free with the capsule. And I'm going to use Power Stomp for 240 thanks to the 2 Iron Crown, which puts me in the driver's seat as they have 0 energy in play going back to them. And from my prizes, I get another energy and my 3rd Iron Crown EX. They attach a double to Arceus and just pass back to me. With the boss in the hand, I've got the game with the Repulsor Axe once I get my last capsule. I use Town Store and see that it is prized, which stinks. But hitting them with Repulsor Axe all but guarantees me the win anyway, because at 200 damage, if they attack me with Arceus V-Star, they will take the 80 damage and knock themselves out. So they evolve to the V-Star and go through the whole Squavit V-Barrel thing. It looks like if they had any more bosses, they might have been prized, so they attack. They knock themselves out, and they were good sports about it as they laughed at the end of that turn. Then just to verify in my prizes, there was the last capsule and another energy. I think I had 4 energies prized in that game, which is not good. I'm just going to speed through this match with Gardevoir just to show a few more of the mechanics in action. I know in Gardevoir there are going to be multiple Pokemon with damage on them, so I use Miraidon to start getting both the Iron Boulder and the Iron Jugulus charged up. On the following turn, I hit their Greninja for 120 with Repulsor Axe, setting up the damage counter defense. They get a Gardevoir and charge a Drifloon, and they will one-shot my Iron Boulder with Balloon Burst, but they knock themselves out in the process. And out of the prizes, I just get a Radar. They send back up Greninja. I use Arven to get Counter Catcher. And I go ahead and grab the De-Evolution TM because Gardevoir is a deck that it is good against. I attach to the Iron Jugulus. Then I retreat Miraidon and send him up. I'm going to use the Counter Catcher to grab the Mimikyu EX that's already damaged because Homing Headbutt will do 110 to the active with all the boosts. So it hits him for 110. And then 50 to the Greninja, knocking both out and netting 3 prize cards. They get another Drifloon and Balloon Burst for 180, knock out my Iron Jugulus. With the prize count here, I probably should have just taken the Drifloon and then one of anything else on the following turn. I was a little bit focused on the TM play, so I grabbed the Gardevoir EX and hit it for 120. Like I said, I probably should have gone the other route, but I used Miraidon to charge the Boulder. And since they didn't have any gusting cards, I was not punished for that mistake, so they just knock out Miraidon. I use Repulsor Axe to get the Drifloon and leave them with a field where there's nothing left that can one-shot me, unless they can recycle another Drifloon with a Super Rod or something along those lines, but they don't really have much draw set up on their side. I get a capsule out of the prizes. It also puts them in the conundrum of having to attack me with something that won't knock itself out, or catching around the boulder, and you can see them working through that problem and finding out that they're basically stuck. So they attack with Miracle Force, and take the 80 damage from the Repulsor axe. Then I just draw, and I use the Boulder to finish off the Gardevoir EX and finish the game. You can see how the deck presents some interesting scenarios. You just have to be careful that you don't think yourself into a hole, because I almost did there. I do like to keep things as short as I can. Hopefully these highlights demonstrated to you the options that you have at your disposal with this deck. It's a cool deck to play around with, and it's not a terrible play in a format with multiple decks that are weak to fighting types right now, like Arceus and Iron Hands and some of the other electric types. If you are a Terrakion fan like me, I think you'll find some satisfaction with this one. And if you're just looking for a good skeleton list to alter for various future decks, keep this one handy because the counts of everything seem to be pretty close. As always, I would greatly appreciate it if you interact however you prefer. Like, comment, share, watch any of the other recent videos. Anything you do will help boost the visibility of the site and help get some of this fun content out to more folks. Until next time, be not afraid. Later.